About 10 years ago, I got really sick of our outdoor furniture getting destroyed in the sunlight or being glass and shattered because the wind picked it up. Specifically our outdoor table. So I ended up making this bad boy. And it's been wonderful. It's 10 years later, there's nothing wrong with it. But the problem is, nothing else has lasted. We've been through multiple sets of chairs. They've either perished in the sun or the fixings have rusted and we've had to throw them out. So it's time to make some bench seats that suit the solidity of this table. And as luck would have it, a friend of mine gave me a bunch of reclaimed totara, which is a New Zealand native timber, which you can't readily get otherwise. The problem is, it's not the best looking timber. It's got nails all through it, it's got cracks everywhere, but inside is some gold. As you can see here, it turned out beautifully. So join me in this video as I show you how I turned this into this. Now, given that this came from under a house, it is riddled with nails and electrical clips, and I don't really want to put it through any of my machines yet. So the first step is to take all the nails out. I've got a bunch of tools to help me do that, and one thing I picked up was this cheap metal detector, which I can just run along and it'll start beeping when it detects metal. I've also got a hammer, a pinch bar, an old chisel, and a few other bits and pieces to help me out. So let's get into that. Now, I don't want to bore you with the gratuitous shots of pulling nails out, but I did want to mention that for a cheap, roughly $20 metal detector, it worked out great. And the other MVPs were the end nippers and the pinch bar. Without these, the process would have taken me way longer. Alright, now I've got all the nails out. I still don't know exactly what I'm going to build because some of this wood is in better conditions than others. So the next step is to plane it all down and see what I actually have to work with. The other problem is this is so long it doesn't really fit in my workshop, so I've had to put my bandsaw outside to get enough space. Alright, let's plane this up and see what we've got. As you can see, I had literal inches to spare, but luckily it all worked out fine. The planing process took the better part of the day as the boards were just so cumbersome to handle and needed a lot of work. But ultimately the process was super satisfying as the wood looked in such bad shape, but underneath all the external scum was some beautiful timber. Right, so I've planed these down to about 40 millimeters or roughly 1.5 inches. And ideally I want the base to be a little bit thicker than that. And so with the fact that some of this wood is gonna poke you in the bum when you sit in it, I think what I'm gonna do is cut it down into strips roughly 50 mils wide, which will be about 2 inches thick. And then I'll laminate that all together. And that way I'll be able to avoid some of the more gnarly bits. I'll still get that rustic look, but I'll get a thicker base and yeah, it should be good. So let's cut this down to strips and see where we sit then. Alright, that's all the strips I need cut. In fact, I've cut more than I need, and the reason for that is some of these pieces are more usable than others. For example, there was a big crack going through here, and it's just fallen apart. So my bench seats need 6 strips each to be wide enough, and now I just need to go through and pick the best 6 for both seats, and then we can get on with laminating them up. So after going through and picking all the best strips, I could cut them all down to a rough length, which was in my case 1450mm or roughly 57 inches. Then with all the strips cut, I could glue them all together. I'm using Type Bond 3 here primarily because it's waterproof and supposedly rated for outdoors, but it also has a long setup time, which is great when you're doing a big glue up. To ensure the strips remain relatively flush with each other, I add some F-clamps across the joins. However, I'm not too precious here, as after the glue is dried, I'm going to put the piece through the planer again to clean it up. Oh, and look, the glue is dry, and it's time to put it through the planer to clean it up. I planed it down to exactly 50mm or 2 inches, which feels like a nice solid thickness for a bench seat. So it turns out that I'm going to make the legs out of the same material as the top. So without boring you with the same process all over again, I went and glued up 4 pieces with leftover strips I had, planed them down to 50mm as well, and gave everything a quick 120 grit sand. It's time to cut the legs to final length, which in this case is 400mm or roughly 15 3/4 inches. I'm using my crosscut sled on my table saw here to ensure I get a perfect 90-degree cut, but also so I can use a stop block to ensure every leg is exactly the same length, which is usually pretty important for chair legs. And in no time I've got 4 full width legs, 2 for each bench seat. I want to put a little bit of design into the legs, so I decided to cut a half circle into the bottom of each of them. This not only makes them look nice, but it also means that we have less timber in contact with the ground. I laser cut a small template to draw the circles on, but you could easily just use an old paint can or something of similar size to draw the circles. Then after marking the circles, I took the legs over to the bandsaw and roughly cut them out. Usually I'd use a router with a pattern bit to clean these up, but there's really no need to be super exact here, so instead I simply took them over to the end of my belt sander and sanded them down to the pattern lines. And in no time I had 4 nicely shaped legs. I'm going to park the legs for now and return to the top, starting off with cutting it down to final length on the drop saw. I want these bench seats to be super durable, and I've got 3 ideas of how to ensure they last the test of time. And the first idea is to cut a dado for each leg on the underside of the seat. And to cut the dado, I've got a super simple technique. I start off with 2 scrap pieces of wood of equal thicknesses, and in my case I'm using some MDF. I then make a mark where the edge of the leg should be, and I clamp one guide exactly on that line. Then I put the leg in place and sandwich it with the other guide piece, clamping all the guides down. Then with the leg removed, we have the perfect guide for a dado or pattern bit to follow, and in my case I'm using the CMT mortising bit. One important thing to remember when cutting dados is to take multiple shallow passes. This will ultimately leave you with a cleaner result and has the bonus of being safer too. I ended up routing the dado to about 10mm or just under half an inch, and as you can see the fit was absolutely perfect. So I've got the bench and the legs basically made, but I don't think that's going to be strong enough to resist any sort of racking. So what I want to do is I want to put a piece of wood in between the legs to give it a bit more stability. So I've cut these support pieces, and I was just going to screw them through into the legs like that. But I was thinking screwing through into end grain isn't that strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially bring them all the way through. And we're going to cut a slot out of each leg. So the leg will slot on top of this. And then I'm going to screw this into the bed. And hopefully that'll be strong enough. To cut the slot in the legs, I'm going to use my table saw with a crosscut sled, as this will make it super easy to get repeatability by using the stops on the sled. So when the stops are set, I can nibble away at a scrap piece of wood to check that I have everything set up correctly. Then I can take the scrap piece over and test the fit on the supports, and I'm looking for a nice friction fit here. And now that I'm happy with the fit, I can cut all the slots in the actual legs. With all the leg slots cut, we need to cut some identical slots in the brace pieces, but the brace pieces are far too long to safely cut in the table saw. So I'm going to use my drop saw and its trenching feature, which is essentially just a depth stop to ensure I don't cut all the way through the workpiece. Now there is a slight catch with using this feature, in that the blade will not travel all the way through the workpiece, leaving the exit cut a little shallower. But the fix for this is pretty simple. Just get a scrap piece of wood to offset your workpiece from the fence and you're away laughing. Now with the slot cut into the brace piece, I can slot the leg over the brace piece into the dado of the seat below, and it feels pretty darn sturdy. I wasn't that happy with the harsh ends of the brace pieces, so I took them over to the drop saw and cut a 45-degree angle on them just to make them look a little nicer. All the pieces are cut to shape, but we have some more harsh edges to deal with, and by some, I mean all. So I chalk up a 45-degree chamfer bit in my trim router and add a small chamfer to all the edges. This not only makes it look a little nicer, but prevents chip out on the ends and the bottoms of the legs. We're almost ready for the glue up, but I want to eventually screw the base piece into the seat for extra strength, so I make sure to pre-drill a few holes across the brace piece first. Finally we can glue it all together, and it's a pretty simple one because everything slots perfectly in place. Again, I'm using Titebond 3 because it's meant to be waterproof, and it's just a simple matter of adding glue to the dados, slots, and the underside of the brace piece. Then I can slot the legs in place over the brace piece into the dados. I do need to give it a little persuasion with a hammer, as the glue tends to swell the wood a bit, making for a tighter fit than when I did the dry fit. Then, with everything aligned perfectly, I can put a couple of clamps across each leg to hold everything in place. Then after countersinking the holes I previously drilled, I drove some stainless steel bugle head screws through the brace piece into the seat. Alright, they're all glued up and out of clamps and they're looking really good and they're feeling really solid. But I've been debating with myself as to how reliable this joint is going to be, especially given that this is an outdoor seat and it's going to be in the weather, in the sun, in the rain, and I just decided that I really want it to be as solid as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few more of these bugle head screws and I'm going to drive them down through into the legs, just a couple on each side. Yes, you will see them, but the nice stainless steel heads, they'll add a little bit of a design aspect to it and they'll just make it a little bit stronger. Now I want these holes to be dead on, so after measuring where I want them to be, I use a punch to make a divot for the drill bit to seat into. I then drill one long hole all the way into the legs and then a fatter hole just through the bench top so that the screw will only grab onto the legs, not the top. Then I countersink all the holes and finally I can drive all the screws home. For a finish, I had an old tin of CD50X Extreme Timber Protection Oil lying around. I'm not entirely sure what it's made of, but I know it's for outdoor timber, so I figured I may as well use it instead of going out and buying something else. I applied 3 coats, waiting a day between each coat, and then a week before finally taking them outside. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I'm super happy to have some really solid outdoor seating now to go with this table. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.